Hello everyone, I'm MVL, and in this video we're going to look at 5 Game Boy games that can be played with enhanced extra features. First up we have Donkey Kong. This is a puzzle platformer. Original Game Boy games are normally black and white, or around 4 shades of grayscale on a green tinted screen for original hardware. This game, however, is specifically enhanced for the Super Game Boy player on the Super Nintendo, which is what you are seeing right now. It has a new color palette and the option for special screen border artwork. It also includes voice clips and enhanced music. I also think that the Super Game Boy player on the SNES is really nice because you get to use a Super Nintendo controller and play on a TV screen. With this method, you lose the option for portability playing this game, but I still think it's a great way to experience the game with all of the extras added to the presentation. Donkey Kong is a fantastic game inspired from the original arcade game, and I think this game is really awesome, especially if you are a fan of the original arcade game and you like to play something like that but with some new content. Any way you play it, this game is really fun. That's Donkey Kong on the Game Boy. And next up we have Metroid 2: Return of Samus. This is a Metroidvania game. As an original Game Boy game, this game can be played in black and white on an original Game Boy. Original Game Boy games can have generic color palettes applied to them when used on different hardware, which will give you 4 predefined colors, but this game also features a custom color palette called the Metroid palette when played on a Game Boy Color, which looks absolutely fantastic. This color palette is actually in the Game Boy Color hardware itself, and it looks really good. You can also see custom colorization when using a Super Game Boy on the Super Nintendo, and it looks very different. Whichever you prefer and whichever way you play it, the follow-up to the Nintendo Entertainment System classic Metroid, Metroid 2 is a wonderful game for a genre-defining series. That's Metroid 2: Return of Samus on the Game Boy. And next up we have Pokemon. Here's Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red. The Pokemon games are role-playing games where you capture and train Pokemon to battle. The Pokemon available in these games are often split across releases, like with Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red, where there are unique Pokemon in each release. Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red are original Game Boy games, which normally have grey cartridge shells, but these are an exception. As original Game Boy games, they are presented in black and white. You can play these games on the Super Game Boy for custom borders, but another cool way to play them is on the Nintendo 64 using the transfer pack which came with the N64 game Pokemon Stadium. Playing Pokemon Blue or Red on the N64 with the transfer pack would actually be emulation, but it's still cool. You can also use the transfer pack to transfer your Pokemon from your Game Boy cartridge to use inside of the N64 game itself. If you have Pokemon Yellow on the Game Boy, you can unlock a Pikachu Pokemon on Pokemon Stadium with a surfing ability, which lets you play a new minigame using Pokemon Yellow. Overall, I enjoy the interesting connectivity between these games, and although gimmicky, it's also really fun. You've got to catch them all in Pokemon Blue and Pokemon Red on the Game Boy. And next up we have Space Invaders. Space Invaders is a classic arcade shoot-'em-up game, which has timeless gameplay, and the Game Boy version of this game looks and plays great, but it also has an incredible hidden feature unlocked by using the Super Game Boy on the Super Nintendo specifically. The data of the 8-bit Game Boy version of Space Invaders was actually small enough that they could also fit a full 16-bit version on the cartridge as well. Whilst you couldn't play a 16-bit game on Game Boy hardware, using the Super Nintendo hardware allows you to experience this hidden game in its full and magnificent glory. Here you get complete Super Nintendo audio and graphical capabilities not possible on the handheld that this cartridge was for. I think this is an amazing hidden feature and perhaps the most technically impressive Super Game Boy enhancement that there is. That's Space Invaders on the Game Boy. And finally we have The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening DX. This is an action-adventure game, and this game features bonus content depending on the hardware you play it on. There are 3 types of Game Boy cartridges. Now for the most part, original Game Boy games have grey cartridges. These play in black and white on original Game Boy hardware, and with a 4-colour palette on the Game Boy Color. There are also black Game Boy cartridges, such as Link's Awakening DX for example. Black cartridges will play in black and white on an original Game Boy and in full colour on a Game Boy Color. There are also transparent cartridges which only work on the Game Boy Color. Now Link's Awakening was originally released as a grey cartridge on the original Game Boy, but it was later re-released as a black cartridge as Link's Awakening DX, like other games like R-Type and Tetris, which were given the DX treatment. You could now play Link's Awakening DX in colour on a Game Boy Color, but it would also work in black and white and still be playable on an original Game Boy as well. However, if you do play on a colour-capable Game Boy, you will have access to some extra content, as you will be able to play the Colour Dungeon, where the visual aspect of the new edition of colour is key to defeating this new challenge. This is a fun and uniquely unlockable feature for a classic adventure game. Link's Awakening would eventually receive a Switch version down the line, but whatever version you decide to play, it's a great game. That's The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX on the Game Boy Color. And there you have it, that was 5 enhanced Game Boy games. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like or a comment to let me know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content. And if you'd like to, you can also support me through Patreon or YouTube channel membership. Thank you for watching, I've been MVL, and I will catch you next time.